Hello everybody, this is Graeme Anderson, and today I'm going to be looking at Ceylon. Now this game really drew me into it with its theme, tea. I love a good cup of tea. This game is set in the second half of the 14th century in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. The company used to grow coffee until a fungus killed off all the coffee plantations on the island, so they switched to growing tea. The players will take on the role of pioneers to develop the Ceylon tea industry. The players will build plantations, harvest crops, and develop new technologies, and export their products throughout the world. So it sounds like a fascinating theme, and with the interesting mechanism that on each player's turn they're going to be playing a card with two actions on it. One of the actions the active player will do, and the other action all the other people around the table can do. So there should be very little downtime as each player is active on every player's turn. That sounds interesting. Let's get to the table, see how it's played, then we'll come back with my final thoughts on Ceylon. Here is Ceylon set up for 4 players. You'll start by randomly placing a large elevation tile and a small elevation tile in each district, so that the small one goes on any space of the large one. This means that in each district you'll have 4 hexagons of level 0, 3 of level 1, and 1 of level 2. You're going to randomly assign 1 councillor to each province. All the action cards are shuffled and placed in their pile. The contracts are shuffled, and the first 4 turned face up into their spots. The district bonus tiles are placed from 10 to 1 on the side, and the technology tokens are placed above the technology track. All the plantation tokens, rupees, and tea chests form a supply at the side of the board. Each player will take a player board, plantation markers of their color which are placed on the player board, 6 discs of their color with 1 on the 0 space on the scoring track, and 1 more to be placed on the stack on the green space of the technology track, with the first player on top and the last player on the bottom. The first player will then assign their player marker and leftmost plantation token from their player board to a 0 level space in one of the districts. Then each other player will do the same in a district that does not already have another player's marker and plantation token. Finally, each player draws 3 action cards. The goal of the game is to be fulfilling contracts, having plantations in each district, researching technology, and of course gaining money. To do all of this, you'll need to be building plantations and harvesting tea at different altitudes and getting advice from the different councillors. The game plays over a number of rounds and will end when one player places their last plantation marker onto the board or the deck of action cards runs out. The player's turn will be playing an action card, then taking the action along with all other players taking an action, then drawing a card to end their turn. Before or after doing their main action, the active player can spend a technology token to take an extra action. So, the action cards in this game are the key to understanding how to take actions. So let's have a look at them. Each card is going to have a total of 4 actions on it. 2 main actions and 2 alternate actions. The alternate actions are the same on every card. Move or take 2 rupees. If any of the main actions have a cost or income, it will be shown here beside the main action icon. When you are the active player, you will discard 1 card from your hand to the discard pile, and which way you play it will determine the actions that the players can take. The side of the card that is closest to the single circle is the action the active player can take, and the main action on the 3 circle side is the action the other players may take. Any of the players can instead perform one of the alternate actions instead of the main action that is available to them. And taking an action is always mandatory. That means on everybody's turn, all players must take one of the actions. As the active player, that is, the player whose turn it is, you can also spend a technology tile to perform an additional action on your turn. This can be done before or after your main card action, and can be any of the main actions or alternate actions. This extra action is not tied to the card you played. Now, let's have a look at the 5 main actions. The plant action allows you to build a plantation. It will cost 5 rupees, and you'll place the plantation token under your worker and the leftmost plantation marker from your personal board. There can only ever be 1 plantation token on each hexagon, but there can be multiple pawns on a hexagon. When you have a plantation in each district, you will take the top district bonus. The first person to get a plantation in every district will get 10 points, the second person will get 6, etc. The harvest action allows you to harvest tea chests from all the plantations where your pawn is and all the plantations adjacent to your pawn. The type of tea chest harvested is depending on the elevation of the plantation. At level 0, you will get black tea. At level 1, you'll get green tea. And at level 2, you'll get white tea. You harvest tea chests from all adjacent plantations, even the ones that you do not own. but all the tea chests from an opponent's plantation give that player a victory point. At the end of harvesting, you have to make sure that you do not exceed 5 chests in your personal supply. If you have more, discard down to 5. The trade action allows you to fill one of the contracts of the export companies and gaining points or rupees. You'll return 3 chests as depicted on the contract. When you fulfill a contract, it must go face down on the leftmost empty space on your player board. Any companies of the same color can be stacked on top of each other, but if you do not have an empty space on your player board for a new colored company, that is, you have not planted enough plantations to clear them off, then you cannot fulfill a contract of a new color until you have space for them. As soon as you have fulfilled a contract, you have to decide which reward you want from that contract, either rupees or victory points. You have to take them all of one or the other, there is no splitting. The new contracts are only refilled after the active player refills their hand. The Contract a Counselor action allows you to ask for advice from a counselor where your player pawn is. It will cost you 5 rupees, and you'll place one of your discs on the board to show them that you have received their advice. You can only get the advice from each counselor once, and as soon as you've gotten their advice, you'll also benefit from their special ability. The last main action is the Advance in Technology development. You'll pay 5 rupees and advance your token 1 space and obtain a technology token and place it on your board. All other players benefit from your new technology and receive 1 rupee from the supply. When you reach the +5 space on the technology track, you will score 5 bonus points. In addition to giving you the option to take an additional action when you are the active player, the technology track will also be used to resolve any ties. Whomever is furthest on the track will always be the winner if they are involved in the tie. The alternate actions which are always available to all players are to take 2 rupees from the supply or to move. The 2 rupees is easy enough, but there's little more to the movement action. The first step your pawn takes is always free, but you can pay additional rupees to move them further. The second hex you move will cost you 1 rupee, the third an additional 2, and the fourth an additional 3 rupees, and so on. Nothing on the board, plantations, other pawns, rivers, or elevation changes block or interfere with movement between hexes. The last thing a player will do on their turn, they will draw an action card so they have 3 cards in their hand, and they will refill any contracts that were fulfilled during that turn. The game ends when either a player has placed their last plantation token on the board, or the last action card is drawn. The round finishes until all players have taken the same number of turns as the active player, then we go into final scoring. Now you're going to be scoring majorities. First place gets 10, second place gets 6 points, third gets 3, and fourth gets 1. Any ties for majority are broken by whomever is highest on the technology track. The majorities will be leftover rupees, and you must have at least 1 rupee to compete for the majority. The next majority is the technology track. And finally, in each district, the majority is the number of plantations the players have. But you must have received advice from that counselor. If you have the most plantations in a district, but you did not gain advice from that counselor, you are out of the running for the majority of that district. Next, you will score your different fulfilled contracts. You'll score more points the more different colors or numbers that you have. So if you manage to fulfill a contract from each of the 5 different companies, you'll receive 15 points. If you fulfilled all the contracts from the same company, you will only score 1 point. Finally, each player will lose 2 points for every plantation marker left on the board, and the player with the most points after all this is the winner. Now let's get back to see what I thought about Ceylon. Let's first talk about theme and components. The theme in this game really came through for me, and I found that the actions I was doing just made thematic sense. You've got to get a plantation to grow the tea, then harvest it and ship it off to your customers. Getting the advice from the counselors in an area and developing new technologies also just made sense in the theme of the game. So overall, this is a theme I really liked and I felt worked really well with the game and the actions you were doing. On to the components. And I did have a few minor quibbles with the components, nothing major, but I felt things were maybe a little too busy. The board seemed a little big for really what you needed, and maybe as you saw through the walkthrough, it almost didn't fit on the camera. The cards themselves are of good quality, but I did find the pictures on the card a little distracting and kind of unintuitive. So I am very glad that they put the action symbols in the corners, as I found those much easier to read and kind of remember what they did. All the cardboard in the game is good quality, and the elevation visually worked well. Although I did have a few minor quibbles with the business, as I've said, that was really nothing that distracted me from the game. So let's move on. The game itself is pretty straightforward. You are creating plantations, harvesting the crops, and shipping the goods, so it's pretty straightforward and really easy to understand. The game really comes down to that card play, And that is something I found absolutely fascinating. With each card having 2 actions on it, and the combinations are not consistent. And by that I mean, for example, a harvest is not always going to be paired with a technology, for example. You need to be figuring out what you want to do, and more importantly, what contract you are going to fulfill. And playing cards so that you're not helping other players beat you to fulfill that contract when they get to do their actions is very interesting. Every action at the beginning can give you an advantage. Getting the advice of the counselors early on, that will give you an ongoing benefit. And getting technology tokens early will definitely give you advantage later on, as going forward, if you ever need to fulfill a contract or harvest and fulfill a contract on the same turn because you see someone else is trying to do that, bam, you have a technology token and you can do it. But both of these actions, the technology and the counselors, are kind of limited. Once you've gone to each counselor, or once you've maxed out the technology track, that action is kind of useless to you. And honestly, other players should be taking advantage that it's useless to you. But I do like that there's always something you can do. Getting 2 rupees is useful, as the plant and technology actions always take rupees. And the movement action can't be overlooked as vital. You need to be moving around the board to get your workers to the right areas so you can plant, harvest, or get advice. And one of the other aspects that really can't be overlooked is the fact that you can harvest from other people's plantations. And yes, this is going to give them a point and does not hurt them at all, but it will give you tea chests that you might not be able to make yourself. And with a limited number of white tea areas found on the board, in my plays I found that players were often harvesting these type of tea chests from 1 or 2 players. Now this is one of those games where you can kind of see the gears of the game all meshing together. You need to be planting to get more tea, and also be freeing up space in your board so you can try and sell to more companies for the end of game scoring. And the gears in this game are fairly obvious, which is a good thing. You can pretty easily see what you need to be doing, and it definitely made teaching this to new people easier because they kind of just understood what they needed to do. What I was surprised at is how quickly the end of the game sneaks up on you, especially with the higher player count. Now there are only 46 action cards, and with 4 players, each person starting with 3 cards, that brings your draw deck down to 34 cards, which means that the players are going to be playing only 8 or 9 cards before the game is over. And I found in a 4-player game, it was much more likely that the draw deck being empty would end the game, instead of one player playing all the plantation markers on the board. And that really changes the dynamic of the mid to end game segment, because you can't fill more than 1 contract per action, and you can't normally store more than 5 tea chests. That means you can't have someone in the final round or 2, fulfilling multiple contracts and getting all these points. You really have to plan it out. Now, as much as I like this game, there are a few things I did not like. The idea that each player will be taking an action every turn sounds like a great way to eliminate downtime, but it does not always work. The other players don't see the card until it's played, so you have to wait for the active player to play something. Then when they're done their action, each player needs to make a decision whether they're going to be taking the main action or one of the alternate actions. And that all depends on the game state and what previous people have done, so this can be lengthy. The other downside of the game is that, for me, is replayability. Yes, you can change where the elevation tiles are placed, but that doesn't really change the way you're going to play. Each area will always have the same set of 0, 1, and 2s. And yes, the counselors will give you different abilities because that's randomized, but I didn't feel like that drastically changed my strategy. Now there is a variant where each player can start off with a one-time ability, but again, that's not really going to be altering my strategy. Things like once per game, when you take the alternate action of taking 2 rupees, you can take an additional 5 rupees. Sounds great, but it's only once per game. So after a few plays, the game started to feel a little samey. It was enjoyable, but the game seemed to play out the same way. Since there's really only one way to get points, and that's fulfilling contracts, this is what everybody focuses on. There's really no other strategy. It all comes down to who can do that one thing the best. The end of game scoring of majorities definitely can't be ignored, but getting points from the varied contracts during the game and having that as a majority at the end makes the contracts very critical. So would I recommend this game? There are a lot of things I liked about the game. I loved the card play and the decisions I had to make on what cards to play. I liked that it was easy to get into. You understood what needs to be done. Plant, harvest, fulfill contracts. Easy. I liked the different endgame conditions and how it definitely felt different based on the player count. I also enjoyed the turn tension. I'm going to try and fulfill this contract, but I kind of see Jane over there. It looks like she's going for the same contract. So I should use my technology tile now to make sure I can do it before she does. I was not as happy as there seemed to be only one path to victory. and I also was not a fan of how each game kind of ended up feeling the same because of that. But even with those two caveats, I still think I would recommend this game. This is a good medium weight Euro game that keeps everyone engaged on everyone's turn through its interesting card play. And that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando, in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.